Okay, so Sarah, please show the first slide. Let's start. जी सलाम आदाब नमस्ते एवरीवन। आज बड़ी खुशी की बात है कि हमारे बीच में तो अच्छे स्पीकर्स, बड़े फेमस गालिब के स्कॉलर्स जो हैं मौजूद हैं। प्रोफेसर फ्रांसिस प्रिचेट फ्रॉम कोलंबिया यूनिवर्सिटी एंड प्रोफेसर महरब फारूकी फ्रॉम यूनिवर्सिटी ऑफ वर्जीनिया। एंड मेन टॉक प्रोफेसर फ्रांसिस प्रिचेट की है गालिब के ऊपर, और उनको इंट्रोड्यूस करने के लिए प्रोफेसर महरब फारूकी हैं, जो बाद में कंक्लूजन भी रिमार्क्स भी देंगे। और इन लोगों को वेलकम करने के लिए मैं अपने बहुत ही करीब साथी और इंडियन डायस्पोरा के कोर ग्रुप के मेंबर डॉक्टर मौज़म सिद्दीकी साहब से दरख्वास्त करता हूँ कि वो प्लीज़ इन लोगों को वेलकम करें और इवेंट का आगाज़। थैंक यू मौज़म साहब।
शुक्रिया डॉक्टर रज़ीउद्दीन, और ये मेरे लिए इंतहाई मसरत का मकाम है कि मैं ऐसी दो शख्सियतों को इंट्रोड्यूस करने वाला हूँ जिनसे मेरा बहुत करीबी ताल्लुक़ रहा है और जिनसे इंतहाई खुलूस का रिश्ता रहा है। और इनमें पहले जो हैं प्रोफेसर एमेरिटा प्रिचेट, जो कोलंबिया यूनिवर्सिटी में 35 साल और उससे भी ज़्यादा प्रोफेसर रही। और इसके अलावा आमतौर पर यह कहा जाता है कि प्रोफेसर के दम से स्टूडेंट का नाम होता है। तो मैं अपने ताल्लुक़ से ये कहूँगा कि मैं ये फ़ख्र महसूस करता हूँ कि प्रोफेसर प्रिचेट को मैंने उर्दू का पहला दर्स दिया था, और उर्दू ज़बान की तदरीस जो है मेरे साथ हुई थी यूनिवर्सिटी ऑफ कैलिफोर्निया बर्कले में। और उसके बाद मैं तो बहुत पीछे रह गया और प्रिचेट जो है बहुत आगे निकल गई। और अब मैं इसमें फ़ख्र महसूस करता हूँ कि अपने आप को प्रिचेट के हवाले से इंट्रोड्यूस करूँ दूसरों के आगे। तो प्रिचेट का काम जो है, जैसा कि अभी हम गुफ्तगू कर रहे थे, एक तो इनका जो है काम क्रिटिसिज्म पे है, और उनकी किताब है नेट्स ऑफ अवेयरनेस। और इसके साथ साथ इनका एक और ज़बरदस्त काम जो है वो दास्तान गोई पे है, दास्तान अमीर हमज़ा। और उसके अलावा दास्तान अमीर हमज़ा से रिलेटेड जितनी भी किताबें हैं, और ये कहते हैं कि दुनिया की किसी भी ज़बान में सबसे लंबी ये दास्तान है। और प्रोफेसर फ्रांसिस प्रिचेट ने इस पे भी काफ़ी सैर हासिल अंदाज से काम किया है। और इस सिलसिले में
वो भी उसी लाइन में बोल रही थी। चलिए ये बात है।
हाँ, वो क्या करे,
वो देख के
वो तो कह रही थी मुझसे मेरी मुलाकात हुई, मैं गया था लखनऊ थोड़ी देर के लिए, तो उन्होंने मुझसे यही कहा।
मेरे ख्याल में आप लोग अपने आप को अनम्यूट कर लें, क्योंकि
ओके, आई म्यूटेड देम, आई एम चेकिंग नाउ।
हाँ जी हाँ। तो मैं कह रहा था कि ये जो काम है इनका, और फिर गालिब पे जो काम किया है इन्होंने, गालिब पे इतनी कमेंट्रीज और इतनी तशरीहात लिखी हैं मशहूर लोगों ने, बड़े बड़े शायरों ने। तो पहली बार फ्रान ने इन तमाम तफसीरात तशरीहात को एक जगह जमा किया, और इससे पहले किसी ने नहीं किया था। और फिर इसके ऊपर इन कमेंट्रीज के ऊपर अपनी एक कमेंट्री जो है लिखी है, जो इट इज़ समथिंग लाइक ए फाइनल वर्ड। तो मैं आपका ज़्यादा वक्त लेना नहीं चाहूँगा, और ये काम जो है वर्क इन प्रोग्रेस है, और गालिबन ये काम चलता रहेगा, ये जो काम है। और इसका जो वेबसाइट है वो है डेजर्टफुल ऑफ रोजेस। मेरे ख्याल में आप में से बेशतर लोग उसको जानते हैं, उसको देख चुके हैं। और इसके बाद मैं मुख्तसर अंदाज में प्रोफेसर महरब फारूकी का भी वेलकम करता हूँ, खैर मकदम करता हूँ। और इनका भी काम जो है लिटरेरी क्रिटिसिज्म पे है, और अस्करी साहब मोहम्मद हुसैन अस्करी पे इनका पीएचडी का डिसर्टेशन है। اور اس کے علاوہ پھر انہوں نے غالب پہ کوئی تقریباً 15 سال سے یہ غالب سٹڈیز میں ہمتاً مصروف ہیں، اور ان کی لیٹسٹ کتاب کوئی میرے خیال میں 4 مہینے کے قریب ہوتے ہیں، اور بہت ہی ماسٹر پیس کتاب ہے، اور مختلف پیرائے سے غالب پہ انہوں نے بحث کی ہے. غالب کی انپبلشڈ پوئٹری، ان کی پوئٹری کے مختلف ادوار، تو یہ تمام چیزیں ایسی ہیں کہ ان پہ کئی گھنٹے لگ جائیں گے بات کرنے میں. تو آج 2 ایسی خواتین جنہوں نے غالب پہ کام کیا ہے اور غالب کی لیڈنگ اسکالرز میں ہیں، اور ایسا بہت کم ہوتا ہے کہ غالب پہ، کیونکہ غالب جو ہیں، غالب کی جو قدر پہلے ہوئی سب سے پہلے ان کی زندگی میں، وہ بھی ایک خاتون تھی جنہوں نے غالب کی شاعری کو سراہا اور ان کی شاعری کو محفلوں میں پیش کیا. تو اس لحاظ سے خواتین کا غالب کے ساتھ جو تعلق رہا ہے وہ اس کا سلسلہ ابھی تک جاری ہے. تو میں اپنے ان مختصر سے انٹروڈکٹری ریمارکس کے بعد مائکروفون میں مہر افشاں فاروقی صاحبہ کے حوالے کرتا ہوں تاکہ وہ ڈاکٹر فران پریچٹ کو انٹروڈیوس کریں. شکریہ. انمیوٹ کریں.
I
What?
asked.
Am I unmuted now? Yes, thank you. So thank you, Muazzam Siddiqui Sahab, for this very warm welcome and introduction of both of us, Fran and myself. I would like to greet all our listeners who are present from all over the world to this wonderful occasion. I would probably say that Professor Pritchett does not need any elaborate introduction because her website and her dedication to Urdu and the years that she spent in producing such amazing, marvelous work, whether it be on Dastan or on Ghalib, and now she's also working on Amir, known to all of us. I dedicated my book to her, and I called her the first woman commentator on Ghalib, and she told me that she was surprised that I mentioned that. I should have said that she is not only the first woman commentator, but I think she undertook a very, very challenging job because she's also a non-native speaker of Urdu. So I suppose that should be also recognized. And I think that whatever it is, I mean, her work speaks for itself. So let me just say a few things about Ghalib so that you can understand her work with more focus. I guess all of us know, ہم سب لوگ جانتے ہیں کہ غالب کے بارے میں یہ بات عام ہے، مشہور ہے کہ وہ بہت مشکل پسند ہیں، اور وہ مشکل پسندی دراصل کیا ہوتی ہے اس کے بارے میں لوگوں نے زیادہ چرچا نہیں کی ہے. مشکل پسندی سے ہم یہ مراد لیتے ہیں کہ وہ دانستان ایسے مضامین ڈھونڈ کر کے لاتے تھے، ایسے استعارے وہ تلاش کرتے تھے جو بہت ہی دور دراز کے ہوں، اور اس کی وجہ سے عام طور پر محفلوں میں لوگوں کو یہ اعتراض ہوتا تھا کہ وہ بہت مشکل شاعری کرتے ہیں، اس کی تہ تک پہنچنا مشکل ہے. تو غالب کو خود اس بات کا احساس تھا کہ ان کے بارے میں یہ ان کی ریپوٹیشن بن گئی ہے کہ وہ بہت مشکل شاعر ہیں، اور اس وجہ سے انہوں نے ایک ربائی بھی کہی تھی جس کو کہ میرے خیال سے سب لوگ جانتے ہوں گے، لیکن I would like to recite it again. مشکل ہے ز بس کلام میرا اے دل، مشکل ہے ز بس کلام میرا اے دل، سن کے اسے سخن ورانے کامل، آسان کہنے کی کرتے ہیں فرمائش، گویم مشکل وگر نہ گویم مشکل. یعنی میں کہوں تو مشکل ہے، نہ کہوں تو مشکل ہے میرے لیے. تو اس میں تو بہت بڑا ٹوسٹ ہے لاسٹ لائن میں، لیکن شاید زیادہ تر لوگوں کو یہ نہیں معلوم ہوگا کہ اس ربائی میں پہلے انہوں نے جو تذکرہ سرور میں جو اس کا ورژن ہے اس ربائی کا وہ تھوڑا سا مختلف ہے. اس میں انہوں نے کہا تھا کہ مشکل ہے ز بس کلام میرا اے دل، होते हैं मलूल उसको सुनकर जाहिल, आसान कहने की करते हैं फरमाइश, गोयम मुश्किल वगर न गोयम मुश्किल। तो इस कदर स्केदिंग उन्होंने कह दी थी सुखन होते हैं मलूल उसको सुनकर जाहिल। तो लोगों ने कहा कि भाई ये सब आप क्या कह रहे हैं, इसको जरा बदलिए। तो उन्होंने फिर उसको 1821 का जो उनका नुस्खा हमीदिया है, द दीवान ऑफ 1821, उसमें उन्होंने उसको बदल दिया और उन्होंने उसको बना दिया सुन सुन कर उससे सुखन वराने कामिल, आसान कहने की। इसके अलावा पूरे दीवान में गालिब के जा बजा ऐसे अशार मौजूद हैं जिसमें उन्होंने ये इशारा किया है कि लोगों को मालूम कि वो, उनको खुद इस बात का एहसास था कि उनकी शायरी जो है वो एम्बिगुअस है, कॉम्प्लेक्स है और ऑब्सक्योर है, जो भी ओपेक है। इसके लिए हजारों तरह के एडजेक्टिव्स हम इस्तेमाल कर सकते हैं। और मैं इसलिए खास तौर पे इस पर तवज्जो ला रही हूँ कि all this has made Fran's work even more praiseworthy. You know, a poet जिसका कलाम everybody knows is so difficult and जिसके ऊपर इतनी commentaries लिखी जा रही हों, उन सब commentaries को इकट्ठा करने के अलावा फ्रैन ने सारी उन commentaries का एक तरह से तज्जिया भी किया है. She has commented on the commentaries and she has culled out all the notable features from those commentaries and then added her own interpretation. So that is the most remarkable piece in this whole in her commentary, that she has it is so comprehensive. उसमें उन्होंने इतने तरह तरह के जाविये हमारे सामने रखे हैं और अपने रीडर्स को, अपने उनकी वेबसाइट्स को जो सर्व करते हैं उनके सामने ये सारी चॉइसेस हैं. इसके अलावा वेबसाइट जो है वो इस कदर यूजर फ्रेंडली है कि जिसने भी उसको मतलब हम ये कह रहे हैं कि उसकी यूटिलिटी वैल्यू भी इस कदर ज्यादा है कि गालिब को उन्होंने एक तरह से आसान बना दिया है हम लोगों के लिए. So Ghalib is no longer as difficult and as ambiguous because of Fran's A Desert Full of Roses. And I don't think I can say anything more about the totally, you know, I mean, her work has been, from I don't know if one was to do a survey of the kind of people who go to her website, it would be mind-boggling, from all over the world and of all ages, and novices and experts. I myself always consult her website whenever I'm teaching Ghalib. So it is a resource that is like a treasure trove, and the more one goes there, we see that she keeps on refining it. She keeps on adding new things to it. She keeps on building up the links and the connections. And now she has also started working on the so-called unpublished verses of Ghalib. So they are also there on the website for us to see. I don't want to go on and on. I would like to hand over the microphone to Fran herself so that she can explain to us the challenges of presenting Ghalib online and how to keep the website updated and what it exactly entails and how we can make the best uses of the website. So I'm handing it over to Fran now.
Thank you, Meher, and thank you, Moazam Saab, for this generous introduction. I hope I'm sharing my screen now. Can you folks see my screen?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, very good. So this is kind of an unconventional talk because it doesn't have a beginning, middle, and end in a formal way, because I'm presenting you something that is sort of like a maze or a labyrinth, in that you can go in all kinds of directions with it. And if you do a Google search for mine, this is where the last 20 years of my life have gone, basically. So I'm very happy to be able to show you some of the fruits of it. If you do a Google search for my name, you'll find this website, and there's a lot of objectively interesting material on it, even if you're not, you can see my cursor, right? You can see my cursor moving?
Yes, yes.
Good, thank you. I have an excellent collection of maps of South Asia. I have texts in the original and English translation. I have a lot, as you can imagine, of Urdu and some Hindi text and translations and study materials and glossaries. I have images, especially on the scrapbook pages. I have a special panel of material on Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who was Columbia's most influential PhD. And so I work with other Ambedkar scholars, and we have a very nice timeline for his work that's also being enhanced. My own professor, C.M. Naeem, is also used my website for his website. Now he has a blog also. And so I've got a lot of his academic and literary critical material on the website. I've also got, of course, these, you can see where my heart lies, the Ghalib and the Amir. I've also got many materials from my own published work, and I have got the website of our dear and recently departed Shamsur Rahman Farooqi, Meher's father and my ustad. And he used to contribute many, many things to the website. So if you'd like to see his materials as he chose to present them, you can look here. Also, here's a couple of links to some things that are particularly of interest to many people. A handbook of Urdu meter for people who are less interested in the traditional Perso-Arabic system and just interested in reading the Urdu poetry effectively. And of course, the Dastan of Amir Hamzah, to which I'm very partial and which I've got an ongoing project about. So anyway, this whole website is entirely open to the public, and I'm hoping that some of you may find it useful for something. So today we're going to be looking, of course, at A Desert Full of Roses. And you can see that it's sort of lined up in a way, kind of like a scholarly book would be, with introductory material and also indices. And of course, I've got the anecdotes and a bibliography. And at the center of it is the Ghazal Index. And I always assume that some people who are new to Ghalib will be looking at the website, because that's my special desire, is to bring in the younger generation and bring in people who would never buy a scholarly book. So there are many ways that we could look at this, because this is a divan-based index, of course. Then I have a truly alphabetical index, and we also have the unpublished Ghazals, as Meher said, and there's a lot of material about them, and I've made the whole set of them textually available and provided commentary on a number of them. But I would like to illustrate what some of the problems and possibilities of a website like this by using one particular verse initially. And if we have time, I have in mind one more. So I happen to know its number. It's 138,1. So if you know the number of a verse, it's very easy to find. Okay, so I click on Ghazal 138. And here is the kind of thing you will find. If you click on a Ghazal link, you'll see how many verses were originally composed and how many are in the divan. You'll see what the rhyming elements are. You'll see the date as best we can determine it, and the number assigned to it by Arshi, the finest Ghalib scholar in terms of textual accuracy and reliability. You'll see a lot of miscellaneous information about the materials available on this Ghazal. And I especially wanted, as folks have mentioned, you have a script choice, which is very important, of course, for many Indian users. The whole thing can be converted into Devanagari. Or if you even don't know either script, you can convert it into a Roman script with diacritics. And just for fun, here is what I actually type on my typewriter in my computer. And then my former student, Sean Pugh, has done a wonderful JavaScript program that converts it on demand to whatever sort of output your computer can handle, whatever you've got on your computer. So I would like us to look at 138,1, the matla, and you can see kya tang hum sitam zadagan ka jahan hai. Kya tang hum sitam zadagan ka jahan hai, jisme ki ek beza mor asman hai. And of course, you can see all the verses, including the unpublished verse, which I've included with an X marker to show that it's unpublished, because there should never be any confusion about what's in the Divan and what's not. So if you want to know more about any particular verse, you click on the link. And before we even start talking about the verse, I would like to say a few words about the commentaries. Now, everybody gives me credit casually for assembling all the commentaries in the world and going over them all. But unfortunately, or fortunately, this is not what I've actually done, because there's over 100 commentaries on Ghalib, which is quite astonishing considering there's been until recently 0 on Mir, who is equally deserving of commentary. So I have chosen 3 or 4 out of the main commentarial tradition for most verses. Sometimes I've put more, but usually I've chosen 3 or 4. Nazm Taba Tabai, of course, is the sort of fountainhead and the very early and most influential one. And the 2 Beyhuds are very representative. And so what I'm asking you to notice here is something that initially was very shocking to me. Namely, these commentators have very little to say about the verse. They obviously claim or think that it has only one meaning. And you can see that that's what they're giving us, one meaning. And the meaning is a lament, right? Oh, how narrow is the world of us oppressed ones, in which a single ant's egg is the sky. And it's a, conventional lover's lament. It could well be read that way. Now, for this one, unusually, we have a commentary by Nair Massoud, the famous short story writer. He has done a small commentary on selected verses of Ghalib, and his commentary is very elaborate, but it's sometimes hard to understand. It's so elaborate that I'm not even sure I've interpreted it all correctly. And of course, Shamsur Rahman Saab has commented on some verses, although not as many as we could wish. And he gives both of these more recent commentators, both of these disruptive people in the commentarial tradition, give you a more complicated vision of this poetry. They are determined that you can interpret this verse in more than one way. Now, I agree with them, of course, but I've got a special mission that they have not assigned themselves, and my mission is to be a teacher for other people and also for myself, because as a non-native speaker, I've had to learn all this stuff afresh. So it's a process of ongoing learning for me to try to understand the multivalence of the poetry, because after all, Ghalib is famous for being a complex, ambiguous, multivalent, Mani Afarini filled, Mushkil Pasand poet. And yet everybody says that, but how does he do it? I mean, in poems that are 15 or 20 words long, how do you create complexity? And that's the question that I've always wanted to ask and that I've tried to answer. And my answer takes the form of what I call little devices. And so the first device I want to show you is what I call the kya effect. And you all know it already. And of course, Shamsur Rahman pointed it out to me that where you see kya in a position like this at the beginning of an utterance, there are several possibilities for how to read the utterance, because of course, Urdu doesn't have question marks or exclamation points. If you ever see any English style punctuation in the classical ghazal world, it's always imposed by modern editors. There is no instance that I know of where any poet has punctuated his own divan in the classical period. So if we could read this in several different ways, and I've shown them clearly here. How narrow is the world of us oppressed ones? Ya kya tang hai, yani bahut hi tang hai. And this is, of course, what the commentators, the ones representing the main tradition, insist upon. But we could also, kya can signal a yes or no question. Kya tang humse tam zadagan ka jahan hai ya tang nahi hai? Kya tang hai ya tang nahi hai? That's absolutely the legitimate function of kya, or it can signify indignant repudiation. Kya tang hai? Yani tang nahi hai, thode hi tang hai, kya bak rahe ho, tang nahi hai. Kya tang hum sitam zadagan ka jahan hai. And right away you can see that whichever one of these readings you choose is going to totally revolutionize the sense and the effect of the verse. And then if you are at a mushaira, of course, as we all know, you get to hear the first misra, and then there's a delay before you get to hear the second misra, right? Everybody knows that. Even nowadays, there usually is, although some people are starting to violate the rule. You hear the first misra, and then everybody starts their back and forth dialogue. Kya hu, va va, subhanallah, mukarrar, and the person who is reciting does taslim, and maybe he recites the verse again. And, you know, there's a little polite turmoil period before we are allowed to hear the first misra followed by the second misra. And so this is, to me, a very important bit of ghazal poetics, that the poet can count on a period of time when when the audience has access to the first misra, but not the second. And so he can mess with our heads in the first misra. He can confuse us, he can perplex us, he can say something absolutely astonishing that we can't imagine where he's going with this, and make us wait for a few minutes to hear the next misra. So you can see, if you were in a mushaira and you heard the reading of the first misra, you might well not know at all where the verse was going. And then, of course, you hear finally the first misra followed by the second misra. Kya tang hum sitam zadagan ka jahan hai, jisme ki ek bezai mor asman hai. Now, this is an interesting little device. Again, I call the kya effect is my name for what's going on in the first misra. And in the second misra, I call it symmetry, because in terms of Urdu grammar, if you say that A is B, you are also saying that B is A. And the way I first perceived this, nobody ever explained it or taught it to me. But when I was pondering over a different share, ye kaha ki dosti hai, ki bane hai dost nasi. I found myself wondering, has the nasi become a dost, or has the dost become a nasi? And I realized that grammatically you couldn't tell. It could be either way. And I realized then that the second misra was framed in such a way, koi chara saaz hota, koi gham, wait, koi, which way does it go? Koi chara saaz hota, koi gham gusar hota. I think, anyway, that it could be made to go either way. And I said, wow, what an unusual feature of this particular verse. And then I gradually realized that it applied to lots of verses. And of course, the commentators almost never recognize it, because on the whole, their idea is to give, the traditional commentators give one prose paraphrase for each verse, and that's it. And there's the reasons why they do that, I think, are very complicated. And I just put a marker on them because I've thought a lot about them, but I don't want to stop and talk about them right now. But if you want to, we can discuss them at more length later. But you can see already that they are unwilling to recognize or present the various possibilities of meaning that are present in this ghazal. Now, Shamsur Rahman in particular does present what I call symmetry as alternative readings. He just doesn't trouble himself to make a device out of it or to explain why. So that even the fine modern commentators like Shamsur Rahman and Massoud, they'll usually tell you what they think the verse means, but they are not usually concerned to tell you why and how it means it and what you can take away so that you can interpret other verses in this way. So me being a teacher, I have developed the concept of symmetry, and on my sets page, I have lots of examples and discussion of the concept of symmetry. But you can see in which a single ant's egg is the sky, or in which the sky is a single ant's egg, are going to be hugely different in terms of what readings they offer for the verse. And so I would like to present just one more little device, which I think is operative in this verse, which is the little word ache. And it took me halfway through the divan to notice the importance of ache. And so here is, if you can see, there's a definition from Platt's dictionary. One single soul alone, only an, the same, identical, only one, a certain one, single of its kind, unique, singular, preeminent, excellent. And so Ghalib and Mir use ache all the time, but they never use ek acha, ya ek kharab, ya ek bada, ya anything that would discipline the ache. They never use it. And so they always leave it broad. And so we have a choice of how to read the ache. And that too it's such a tiny little word, but it constitutes a device. And once you think of it as a device, when you're reading other verses of Ghalib, you can notice it and say, oh, are there different ways to read the ache? And would they enrich the verse and add extra meanings if we read the ache in a different way? So I try to show, of course, my translations are the very reverse of literary. They're exceedingly clumsy and clunky. And it's because I'm such an English wali that I know English is my ally and my language, and I can distort it freely and make it do tricks that it doesn't want to do for the sake of bringing us close to the Urdu. So that I hope that people will use the website, and even if they've had only a year or so of Hindi or a year or so of Urdu, they will say, oh, these are very short poems and they're not that hard, and we can read them and they're very intriguing and interesting. And so I've done my best to isolate and identify and, present the different kinds of devices that I wish I knew whether Ghalib consciously ever used these terms, because that's another thing that's interesting about these terms, is that they are not present in any handbook of Persian or Urdu poetics. You'll never find recognition of any of the terms I've got on my sets page. And I won't go on and on about this now, but if we had more time, I would show you some of the other terms that I've also, devices that I've also developed and have found through many, many examples of them in Ghalib's verses. And so I think it's because the Persian handbooks are always about poetry in general, and they're not about specifically the ghazal verses. You know, poems 15 or 20 words long are a separate category. They have different poetics, they have different possibilities, and they obviously present a whole new set of challenges and opportunities. Now, I've given you some comments here. I frequently hook up Mir verses that are relevant. And I sometimes, of course, I've got to mention Hamlet. Oh God, I could be bounded in a nutshell and count myself a king of infinite space, were I not that I have bad dreams. And I even add a little picture, which I know some students have told me that they really enjoy. These are ants' eggs, of course. There's no reason for there to be a picture except just my great joy and pleasure that I find in the verses, and attempt to share it with other people. And so how much more time should I take?
Well, you have 45 to 50 minutes total to talk about. You have still plenty of time, I guess.
Okay, well, rather than, I could ring the changes here, but you can see that if you interpret these verses differently, the various possibilities of each line differently, then you can generate a whole bunch of either complaints or non-complaints about how the world is large or small for us oppressed ones. And in fact, my favorite reading is, what? As if the world of us oppressed ones is narrow, in which an ant's egg is the sky. In other words, we have plenty of room in here. We are delighted. We have a whole ant's egg for our sky. Who could need more? And that brings it right into line with Hamlet. And so I favor that one, but you can obviously mix and match and make your own choices here. So let me just briefly show you one more verse, and that will be a cuter and funnier one. Okay, this is Ghazal 111, and it's maybe the most translated of all ghazals. It's the famous Sab Kahan Kuch, which I'm sure everybody in this room has encountered. And it's a late ghazal. And because it's so often translated, I've actually compiled an anthology of translations for it, for this one and for Ye Nati Hamari Qismat, which are the two that are most often translated. That one is Ghazal 20 in my numbering. And so if you're curious about what the translators have achieved, here's how you can find out. But I want to look at one particular verse. And I want to look at verse 3. Thi banat na she gardu din ko parde mein neha. Thi banat na she gardu din ko parde mein neha. And of course, remember, in a mushaira, you don't get the second misra immediately. Of course, the banatun nash are the daughters of the bir, B-I-E-R, on which a dead person is laid. The daughters of the bir, the constellation in the sky, in the day were hidden in parda. And then you can become quite curious. Okay, they sound very respectable because they're called daughters, and so they should be living in a sharif manner in their father's house. But shab ko unke ji mein kya aayi ki uriyan ho gayi. What came into their heads at night that they became naked? And now this is, to my mind, a different kind of verse. I call this kind a mushaira verse, or a 1-2 verse, because timing is crucial, and the ordering and the sequence of and the delay of the second misra are very, very helpful. Because when you hear the first misra, you can't tell what's coming, and then of course you have to wait. But even when you hear shab ko unke ji mein kya aayi, you don't still know what's coming. Not until you hear the word urya do you get the sudden picture of what he's talking about, and you realize there's a little shock value in the word naked, even now, even in English, and there must have been a similar shock value in the word urya in Ghalib's day. And in fact, I have evidence of that, because every single time in the divan that he uses the word urya, it's always in this position. It's in the qafiya position, so that it's always at the very end of, as late as possible in the second misra, so that it coincides with the closural effect of the rhythm and the meter and the radif. And it also has this extra little punch of enabling you to interpret the whole verse for the first time, and this extra little punch of urya, the word naked, which is sort of, in a small way, a little bit shocking. And then, of course, we get the additional pleasure when we think about it as it sinks in, of realizing two more things: that he's interpreted the stars coming out in this way. He's really just using the fact that the stars have come out and giving them a sort of enjoyably erotic connotation. And then the second realization that also hits you is that he's really just asking a naive and innocent question and leaving it to our imaginations to answer, because he's not saying anything questionable or anything that could be called obscene or in poor taste. He's asking, maybe even in a shocked way, shab ko unke ji mein kya aayi ki urya ho gayi? What came into their heads that they at night came out naked? And so we, of course, all of us have in our heads various notions of what could be in their minds, and we supply the information that he is not giving us. He is using inshaiya speech rather than khabariya speech, and asking about what came into their heads. So it's a delightful verse, and it's a very different kind, because you notice that you don't mix and match, you don't go back and revise it 2 or 3 times over the way we did with the other one that I just showed you. The moment you get to urya ho gayi, there is like a burst of laughter, a burst of enjoyment, and you are ready to move on. So these are the two big structural patterns that I notice in Ghalib. One of them is the sort of mix and match, where you have various options for each line, and you can also adjust the relationship of the lines differently, and you have to think about them in a Ghalibian way. And yet, even though he's a mushkil pasand poet, here is a verse that is not mushkil, and he has plenty of these. This is a charming and delightful and very clever and witty and risque verse, and he has plenty of these that are called in my criteria mushaira verses. And one of the criteria for a good mushaira verse, it bursts like a balloon. It builds up and builds up, and then when you get to the end of it, it bursts like a balloon, and you don't have the urge to go back and think and think and think and brood about it and say, have I got all the meaning from it? Because you know you have. And so you're ready to move on to the next verse. So those are 2 examples of the kind of thing that I'm doing. And I've got a lot more bells and whistles and a lot more materials on my sets page, just to show you. There's many cases where you can find interesting materials, and Also, if you want to find particular motifs, if you want to find example verses involving archery or so forth and so on, you can find them easily there. So I've tried to present something for everybody. And of course, that means something that I like particularly myself, but also that other people can like. And I mean to appeal to both the next generation that does not have the background that you folks do, and also to complete foreigners, people who may not know much Urdu at all. But I believe that this poetry is so spectacularly enjoyable and interesting that it can be used for almost anybody, and it can enrich the lives of a whole lot of people. So even though Ghalib is basically untranslatable, well, here's what we can do instead. We can share resources on the internet. And even though there are hardly any more of the classically educated ustads anymore, those of us who are working in this area can use new resources and new techniques, and we can reach out in new ways. And so why don't I stop here, because otherwise I could go on and on and on. And why don't we ask Mahar to add her comments.
महर आप अनम्यूट कर लें अपने को.
Okay.
जी.
Well, thank you, Fran. This was so instructive, and I'm sure I could see from reading the chat that there were many people in the audience who did not know that there was this resource available, that and that with a click you could actually read the meaning of Ghalib's verses. There were a few things that you didn't mention about your website, and one of them is that you can read the Ghazals in any script that you prefer. So you can read them in the Devanagari script if you don't know how to read Urdu with a click, and then you can also read them in Roman if you don't know Devanagari, and of course there's Urdu. So all this material is available in the three scripts. Now, I always wanted to bring this question up in a discourse, excuse me, on Ghalib and the commentarial tradition, that why is it that only Ghalib's poetry merited this extensive commentarial tradition? And when I was working on my book, this question bothered me, and I tried to think about it and think it through. And I feel that it has to do, in the end, it has to do, like many things with Ghalib, that he was a pioneer of sorts. He did things that no one else had thought about doing. And one of the things that he did was that he edited his Urdu Diwan before publishing it. And he was a very strict editor of his own work. And therefore, he literally curated the verses that he thought he would present to his audience. And he left out a large number of verses, which were actually more than what we call the current or the authorized Diwan. So as a result, we have two sets of Ghalib available. One is the Urdu authorized Diwan, or the published Diwan, since both of them have been published. And the other is what, for the sake of convenience, we can call the unpublished verses. And amazingly, there have been commentaries on the unpublished verses as well. So while there are so many Urdu poets who have not been able to get even one commentary on their verses, Ghalib has actually been fortunate, or has been privileged, or has been so attractive or mysterious to his readers that even the unpublished verses have produced a commentary. And there are as many as three complete commentaries on Ghalib's unpublished verses, which in itself is a big thing to think about, because if Gyan Chand Jain has done the most comprehensive commentary on the unpublished verses, and it's a very difficult work that he undertook, because he didn't have any previous commentaries before him. except for Asi's, which was incomplete and very whimsical. So I think, I wonder if Fran has thought about it as well. But I kind of think that this has partly to do with his publishing trajectory and also his keenness to get his poetry included in the curriculum. The books that were being put together for teaching Urdu in the university and in high school. They had selections from Ghalib. And I think Nazm Tabatabai probably wrote his commentary, which is really a good commentary. And I mean, it's terse, but it's sufficient. And as Fran pointed out, the early commentaries are very straightforward. They just give you one meaning, or they point out some controversial, some controversy that it could be, like it's a muhammal verse, for example, that it doesn't actually have any meaning because the commentator, I mean, Nazm Tabatabai has called Naqsh Faryadi Kiski Shokhi Tahrir ka muhammal verse almost. So the verses that they didn't understand, they call them muhammal or meaningless. But later on, of course, other commentators have come along, and of course, my father has done stellar work in this direction. So I feel that Ghalib's commentators tended to, it had a kind of snowballing effect. Once there was one commentary, then there were two, then there were four, then there were six, there were eight, there were so many commentaries. And I wonder why no one ever thought of writing a commentary on Momin, for example, or Musafi, or even Mir, until, Mir, my father did this Sher-e Shoranges, and now probably we will have more commentators on Mir. So this is one question that I wanted to throw out there for all of us who are listening to this wonderful discourse by Fran Pritchett, who has really, I mean, just by putting it out there, I mean, all the work that she put in and made things easy for us so that we can have this discussion, because her commentary is available, and all the wonderful devices that she has pointed out. The sets and the mushaira balloon and the and the poignancies and the expectations after the first misra, what is going to happen in the second misra, and all of those things really they are remarkable, because sometimes we just don't pause to ask some of the most obvious questions because we just take it for granted. And that's what I want us to do more and more. Ask ourselves, why not have a commentary on another poet, and how Ghalib's commentaries can help us do that? Or are the other poets not worthy of a commentary? Is that so? Is that right? Is Ghalib so very special that only he needs to have commentaries? These are some of the questions that I wanted to throw out there, and we can have some discussions. Also, when I was little, I just want to tell you some anecdotes. Because, as you know, my father is Shamsur Rahman Farooqi, and I'm so privileged to be his daughter. So I was very young when I was introduced to Ghalib and Mir and all the classical poets. And he did his best to help me build up a good vocabulary. And I always had a notebook in which I wrote in my scrawly handwriting the meanings of words. But, this Beze, More, Asman, I also thought that more must mean peacock. It didn't occur to me that more means ant. So I always had some very spectacular imagery surrounding me whenever I read Ghalib, because I literally imagined his poetry in very, very strong colors. So Ghalib really, I mean, and now that I've worked on the unpublished verses, I find that he uses certain images over and over again. As Fran also said, that this idea of using ek to signify unity. I mean, to signify both, a micro and a macro, because ek can be small and ek can be very big also. And Ghalib uses that device very well. Similarly, there are certain tropes and there are certain things, images that he uses over and over again. And Beza, that is the egg, he uses a lot. The egg of a peacock, the egg of an ant, the egg of a dove, the egg of a pigeon, you name it. There are all kinds of eggs that are there populating his poetry. So I'm going to now stop here and kind of open the floor to questions or whatever the whatever is the protocol here. Thank you.
Thank you both. And now the next phase is basically question and answer, which is from the audience. So this section usually is moderated by our co-host, Dr. Rafat Hussain. And so he will ask the audience selectively, one by one, to raise questions, and to you both or to one person. And then that's how it goes. Rafat?
Thank you, Razi Bhai. Thank you, Madam Pritchett, Professor Pritchett, Professor Farooqi, Dr. Siddiqui, for a wonderful discussion and the concluding remark. So, as we know, there are two options to ask the question, and the forum is open. Now, for the question, you can raise digital hand or you show your interest in the chat box. So, first person who showed the interest is Dr. Nazir Ahmed, please. Unmute yourself. Next person is Mahashim Syed. So, Dr. Nazir Ahmed.
जी बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया प्रोफेसर साहबा। ये एक छोटा सा सवाल है, and that has to do with the impact of tasawwuf in Ghalib's poetry. As we know, that influence has been there, the tradition has been there since the times of Amir Khusro, and it's also manifest in the Seljuk architecture. And one of the principal themes in Tasawwuf has to do with reflection. As you know, you pointed out symmetry. It's like the aina and the ox. In the Tanazzulat, if we go through a study of Tasawwuf, the fourth stage and the fifth stage, the reflection between Alam-e-Khayal and Alam-ul-Mulk, or a reflection of Ayan al-Sabita onto Alam al-Mulk. For instance, in this couplet that you recited and you explained so beautifully, the Baize Mor and Asman, it could be interpreted in so many different ways. If we take the one to be an Aina and the ox, it could be the Khatra and the Darya, or similar to, for instance, Partav and Aftab and so on. So my question to you, madam, is what's your opinion? I've always held the opinion that it's impossible to understand Urdu poetry, whether it's Ghalib or Iqbal or anyone else, unless one knows Tasawwuf. Your comment, please.
Well, I think Ghalib certainly uses a lot of Sufistic imagery and Sufistic sort of themes and ideas. It's easy to document that. But I find that it's not necessary to think that we have to have a heavy duty theological background in order to appreciate what he does with it, because I think he uses it the way he uses terms from many other domains also. He uses sometimes legal terms, commercial terms, terms from other parts of life. And what's interesting about them is the way he uses them. And so many poets use Sufistic terminology or embody Sufistic perspectives, but we don't enjoy their work as much as we enjoy Ghalib. So to my mind, the real mystery question is, how does he do what he does? And what he does is take the materials that are available to everybody and put them together in his own special way. So Sufistic materials are definitely there. And I presume that the person Ghalib had Sufistic interests of a kind, but it's really, it's less important to my mind than the kind of creative genius he had for making use of these materials.
Thank you, Professor. The next person is Mahashim Syed, please. Unmute yourself.
Salam, adab, and for Ghazi Saab and Rafa Saab and Sir, Ustad Mohtaram, Dr. Mozam Saab. So Dr. Pritchett actually introduced me, my friend back then in 2013. He showed me the book of Dr. Pritchett, and he told me that आपने वो किताब लिखी थी, I think you were in University of Illinois, Chicago में गालिब पर. So I was amazed. मुझे यकीन नहीं आया था बिल्कुल, लेकिन अब तो बहुत अच्छी तरह यकीन आ गया है. Sorry, बहुत खुश हूँ मैं. बस सिर्फ one question मैम मेरा ये है कि have you worked on prose of Ghalib also? Because गालिब के लताइफ जो हैं उनके जोक्स बहुत मशहूर हैं. उनकी नसर जो वो स्पॉन्टेनियस आंसर करते थे तो उससे उनकी इंटेलेक्ट बहुत पता चलती थी. Have you worked on that? I'm just asking, sorry.
Yes, well, actually, the anecdotes that we think of as Ghalib's jokes mostly come to us through Hali. And so I have translated and included a whole bunch of them on the website. If possible, I've linked them to verses where they fit in or something like that. But broadly speaking, I haven't worked on his prose. Meher has done more with his prose, including his very difficult Persian prose, because I enjoy the poetry. And although I enjoy his prose, I don't enjoy it as much as I enjoy his ghazals. And this whole enterprise and the amount of work I've put in is for my, ultimately it's because I enjoy it so much. So I just can't say, I don't even work on the other genres of poetry that he's written. I mean, he has a whole bunch of genres of other genres in his divan that I scarcely pay any attention to. And no doubt that's a problem, and I should, if I were a better human being, I would work on all his genres, but I'm sort of a ghazal fan, so that's where I put my energy.
Thank you. Professor Farooqi, do you want to add something?
Yes, of course. I think Ghalib's prose is also, like his poetry, very, very attractive and appealing, particularly his letters, because उनके जो खत हैं उन्होंने उसमें एक नया तर्ज अपनाया है. और इसके पहले ज्यादातर प्रोज फारसी में लिखा जाता था, तो गालिब को उर्दू का प्रोज स्टाइलिस्ट भी हम
जी, खुतूत भी उनके बहुत मशहूर हैं, बहुत पढ़ते हैं लोग. जी 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 जी, शुक्रिया बहुत बहुत. Thank you very much. Thank you, so nice.
Thank you. Next person is Imtiaz Saab, please. And after Imtiaz Saab is Muhammad Aslam.
Yes, this is Imtiazuddin from Chicago. My question is simple. Is great poetry mostly inspiration or mostly conscious, deliberate effort through training and other interactions in society and family?
Well, I can't see why there should be one answer to that question, since there's so many great poets and the life circumstances of them would be very different in different times and places and language backgrounds. So I don't know how to answer that question, but it's certainly an interesting one to think about.
Thank you.
Thank you. Muhammad Aslam Saab, please.
My question is about the pronunciation of, is it more or moor? Beze moor or beze moor? I'm a bit confused because I know a little bit of Baluchi, and in Baluchi, they'll call an ant a moor. And you know, Baluchi is related to Persian some way.
Well, I think it's more, but the vowel system in Persian is flexible in some ways. So there may be people who pronounce it mur, I'm not sure. Meher, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I would say that the pronunciation is different in Urdu, and we pronounce it as more, not as moor. And that's primarily because you know, just as we speak English with our own inflection, so we speak Farsi, and this is occurring in an Urdu verse, so we give it the Urdu pronunciation.
Thank you both. Aisha Rashid, please. Unmute
Okay,
yourself.
hello everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, Meher Appas and Dr. Pritchett, I hope I'm not mispronouncing your name. It's really wonderful. It's been a wonderful session. Let me congratulate you on, I mean, this is not new for you, definitely, but for me, it's a first time. It's my first time that I'm listening to you. So my question number one is, what do you think about Ghalib as well as Iqbal too being used as a kind of template online? And every verse, whether they're rhyming, couplets which are rhyming or not, and couplets which are substandard, are being shared on WhatsApp and through Facebook and other social media too, in the name of Ghalib and Iqbal too. This is my first question. Number two is regarding the script that we use for Urdu. So since I know Persian script, I read Urdu in Persian script. Do you think that there is any kind of loss in case we use Devanagari script to write Urdu? Don't we lose certain consonant sounds when we use Devanagari to write Urdu? These are my two concerns. I have a lot of questions, but yeah, number three is that I teach translation at post-graduation level, and I don't know how to, I often make my students translate couplets of Ghalib, and I find that there's a huge loss in terms of socio-semiotic content when Ghalib is translated into English. And I heard that you said that Ghalib is untranslatable. At the same time, people are very much interested in Ghalib, and he's a big name from the subcontinent. So is there any solution that you have come up with, some kind of simplification formula that you have come up with in the process of your research and your dedication to Ghalib and his poetry and your journey?
Thank you, Aisha.
Reading.
I'll just reply briefly because those are all very large questions.
Yeah.
The first one about misattributions and completely implausible shares being attributed to Ghalib is huge, but it resembles the way things are attributed to the Buddha, you know, or things are attributed to Martin Luther King or to somebody. You just pick some great person and attribute them to everything you hear to somebody like that. So on the one hand, it's a compliment, no doubt, because you think he's an authoritative person to attribute things to. But on the other hand, or to Gandhi, people attribute everything to Gandhi also. But on the other hand, it's a very warm, fuzzy kind of stupid compliment that if it doesn't bear any resemblance to their real work. So I don't know, it's just part of what goes on in the internet, and people do it many times very affectionately and genuinely. So over time, perhaps they'll learn better. The question is, do we lose something if we read in Devanagari? In principle, if you put your mind to it, any language, I believe, can be rendered in any alphabet. I mean, there may be exceptions around the edges, but basically, if the Devanagari user wished, it would be possible to formulate equivalent transcriptions, just the way you can do it with diacritics in Roman script. You can formulate transcriptions that would capture every bit of the Urdu script. But of course, people don't do that. And so in the way that they use Devanagari, there is a loss, and how serious a loss it is depends on how seriously you're interested in Ghalib. If you're not very serious and you just want to recite a few nice shares, it may be quite satisfactory. But if you're a serious person who wants to dig deep, then you will find it's a good investment to learn Urdu script. And as far as untranslatability goes, yes, I agree with you that he's untranslatable. And I began my career working hard to translate him, and I constantly failed, and or at least to my satisfaction. I had a few local successes in special cases, but basically not. And so yet the whole time I could teach him And my students got the verses, and they liked it. And I kept asking myself, why can I teach it but not translate it? And then I said to myself, Fran, you stupid person, that's what commentaries are for. You need to read some commentaries, and that will help you. And so I decided to work on some commentaries. And then I discovered that the commentators were not interested in the same kind of thing that I was at all. And so I realized the internet had come along, and that was the perfect medium for, you know, translating one line as 3 or something like that. So I completely renounced the idea of giving people a beautiful reading experience in English. I want them to have direct access, not Nabokov and Evgeny Onegin, push them right back into the Urdu. As Nabokov said about his translation, if the English gets too beautiful, I throw it away and start over, because he doesn't want people to be distracted by the English. So that's my credo for the website.
Thank you.
Rafat,
Yeah.
I think the questioners should identify also from where they are talking.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Okay, I was Aisha Marira, yes. Because I did not introduce myself, so let me tell you that I'm Professor Aisha Marira, Rashid from Aligarh Muslim University. Thank you very much, Dr.
Welcome on the forum. Okay, so next person is Syed Hussain Saab. Syed Saab, introduce yourself.
Hello. Hello.
Yes.
This question is from both of
Syed
you.
Saab, introduce yourself in one sentence, please.
Yeah, it's one sentence. There is
Yes.
there is a share which I like very much, but every time I recite, they say it is not in the Diwan. So, and I like it very much. The share is Dero Haram, Aine Takrare Tamanna, Wamandgi Shok Tarashi Panahi. Is it a Ghalib share, or I just, this is my question.
It's one of the unpublished verses.
It is Ghalib.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh,
Second, one very small question.
नहीं क्वेश्चन की बात नहीं है, आप अपने बारे में 2 सेंटेंस में बताइए.
जी, मेरा नाम तो आपने ले लिया, सैयद हुसैन, and I am from Canada and very Ghalib's fan. So okay, that's my introduction. So the second question, just to be fast and brief, I have a book in which Ghalib's 50 Ghazals have been translated in rhyming English, and it's really good. So my question is rhyming translation in English, is there other books also?
Do you mean, are there other books of rhymed translations in English?
Yes.
You can look, the 2 ghazals on my website, number 111 and number 20, have anthologies of translations, and many of the translators have tried to make their translations rhyme. So you can find examples on my website, and in each case, the book that it came from is identified. So I'm sure you can get some of those books if you like.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I like very much the rhyming translation. That's why I asked the question.
Thank you, Syed Saab. Arif Khan Saab, please unmute yourself.
Yeah. Assalamu alaikum. This is Arif Khan from Chicago, and my question is: during the time of Ghalib, we were a colony. So basically, I was just wondering, in his poetry, does it reflect anything about the struggle during that time?
Do you mean anti-British feeling or
anti-British feeling, or as a part of, being a, like that was a Jang Azadi happened during the same time, like it was 1857.
You mean 1857? Yeah.
Right. Does it reflect anywhere? Because I don't know.
Okay, well, he wrote a whole memoir about the partition, about 1857 experience, and it's called Dastan, and he wrote it in a very fancy kind of Persian, and he also intended to submit it to the British and did submit it to the British after the rebellion was put down. And so it's been translated, and a translation is on my website, so you can find it there. But otherwise, after 1857, he basically hardly wrote any more ghazals, not more than half a dozen in the remaining 12 years of his life. So basically his output, his oeuvre as in the ghazal domain does not reflect the experiences of 1857.
Thank you, Dr. Pritchett. You've been amazing.
Thank you. Let me see if there's, yeah, so that was the end, Razi Bhai, that was the end.
Dr. Jabbar is.
Oh, he raised his hand. Oh, the last minute. Okay. Thank you. Jabbar Saab, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Great. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. So I asked this question, very personal for somebody uninitiated in the language Urdu, coming from the South India, Tamil Nadu. So you're very passionate about the Ghalib. Even Ghalib, I didn't know until a few weeks ago, a few months ago, through this forum. So what was that you attracted to Ghalib in your, what is the trigger for you? This is for Professor Frank.
Well, actually, the trigger was in Mahashim Siddiqi's Urdu script class at Berkeley many decades ago. And he taught us the script in a very unusual way. We were Hindi students, and in most programs in North America, students are taught both scripts. And so we Hindi students were also taught the Urdu script separately by Mahashim Syed. And he taught us, as soon as we had got through the letters in a very primitive way, we hardly even knew what an izafat was. He had us reading a share of Ghalib. And I remember it took us a whole hour to read this share, and we were very shaky afterwards. But he then played the share as sung by Begum Akhtar. And somehow I just said to myself, this is how poetry ought to be. And so I just knew that. I felt it corresponded to things I love in poetry and things I love in other kinds of poetry too, like very tight structure and very intense formal unity and over-determination of content in different ways. I mean, I like a tight little poem and not a floppy big epic. So that's just what I liked. And even before I knew enough Urdu to start studying Ghalib, I knew that I should work on him. And when I looked at people's translations, I said, oh, these aren't as good as they should be. Perhaps Ghalib is waiting for me to come along and translate him. And it turned out he wasn't, but he was truly untranslatable in a normal sense. But it was, the internet came along, and that was a great blessing. And so it's been a privilege and a pleasure to share the heritage that in a sense belongs to you all, but in another sense it belongs to me too. So that's an effect of globalization, and here we have Zoom enabling us to enact it, with Mahar being in India, and yet here we all are in little boxes. Mahar, do you want to add anything to that comment?
Not really, no.
Thank you. So that was the end. Can I ask you a last question? It's a kind of a puzzle. So it's almost 150 years when Ghalib was born. Why there is no another Ghalib now? So I was thinking, okay, Einstein का भी वही ज़माना था, Ghalib का भी वही ज़माना था, दूसरा Einstein अभी तक पैदा नहीं हुआ, तो क्या Ghalib का भी यही है, या कोई Ghalib के बराबर का कोई शायर है जिसको कि रिकॉग्निशन नहीं मिला? क्या ख्याल है आपका, मैडम प्रशेत और मैडम फारूकी?
Well, I will say that, remember, in Ghalib's day, many people disliked his poetry extremely and even considered it meaningless and wrote parodies and satires about it, and definitely thought that he was ruining the beautiful romantic lyrical genre that they wanted it to remain. Whether that was true or not is a whole nother question. But remember, Ghalib was very controversial in his day, and it's quite possible, as you were mentioning, that there might be unrecognized people who are great poets in our generation, because it's really harder to recognize new poets and great poets that are your contemporaries, and also harder to recognize ones that are really bad and are destined to fall by the wayside. So probably scholars of the future may come along and say, isn't it amazing? These people were contemporaries of so-and-so and they didn't even appreciate him or her. But now we would give anything to have more information about so-and-so and to know more about their poetry. And so it's just one of these things. I mean, even the Ghalib boom didn't start up for a while after his death. It took a while, and it was partly due, I think, to other factors. That the whole question of why are there so many commentaries on Ghalib, Meher has addressed the question of why are there so few on other people. That it really is a question of why. In effect, you can say that during the time of the heyday of the Ghazal, there were not commentaries, basically, because people were doing these things orally and in mushairas and in their ustad-shagird relationships. But after all that was gone, then people began to feel the loss, I think, and to wish to salvage things from it and to reconnect with the old days before their zamana. And in that case, somehow they wished to reconnect with Ghalib rather than reconnecting with Mir or Momin or most of the other great poets. So there are several different kinds of mysteries and questions to be thought about here. Meher, what do you want to say?
Yeah, I want to add my own 2 cents, and that is that I want to remind everyone that Ghalib composed in Farsi way more than he composed in Urdu. And his Farsi output is 5 times as much as his Urdu output, but nobody considers him to be a phenomenal poet in Urdu, in Farsi, excuse me. So here we have another dilemma, that the same poet is writing in Farsi and in Urdu, and in Urdu he becomes the greatest poet of all times. And in Farsi, he's just a poet, right? He's not considered to be among the top 5 Farsi poets. So these things are very enigmatic, and I don't think there is any one straightforward answer to this. This question whether there is another Ghalib somewhere, or why don't we have another Ghalib. Also, languages change and morph, and I've been reading some excellent Ghazals in English, actually, so which are very, very Ghalibian as far as I can tell. So you never know. There might be somebody lurking around who would be a modern Ghalib. But
also, oh, sorry.
No, I just wanted to repeat myself by saying that why didn't he achieve that kind of fame in Farsi that he did in Urdu? This is a huge question, and it has to do with cultural politics. So
and also, speaking of cultural politics, Meher's father, Shamsur Rahman Saab, who was my ustad, he started out as an ardent Ghalibian, and at a certain point in his life, I still remember, he called me up and said in a hushed voice, I'm afraid that I think that Mir is a greater poet than Ghalib. And I was like, oh no. But he did think that, and either he thought that, or he would sometimes put it differently. He would say Ghalib and Mir are equally great poets, but Mir has a much wider range, which is certainly true. So speaking, if you're looking for another Ghalib, if you trust the judgment of Shamsur Rahman, Mir is a person to look at. And of course, we have Shamsur Rahman's wonderful Sher-e Shorangez, which yours truly has translated and added to her website just as a glutton for punishment with great joy. So Mir is the interlocutor for Ghalib of all.
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely the best.
Thank you both. Back to Razi Bhai. Razi Bhai, you want to add something?
There is one more question lately, Mr. Sadia. Oh, sorry.
Oh,
Mr.
okay, I see.
Dr. Iltifat.
Okay, Iltifat Saab, you are the last.
He's from New Jersey. Yeah.
Yeah.
Iltifat Saab.
जी सर जी अपने आप को म्यूट करने की कोशिश कर रहा था तो गालिब पर डिस्कशन है तो उर्दू में सवाल कर सकता हूं अगर इजाजत हो
जी
और प्रोफेसर प्रिचेट इस कदर फिनोमिनली फ्लुएंट है उर्दू में कि दिल खुश हो गया। सवाल आप दोनों से ही है कि गालिब की बेइंतहा उर्दू शायरी उन्होंने खुद तल्फ कर दी थी, खुद उन्होंने उसको मुनासिब नहीं समझा था, उसका कुछ अंदाजा है और उसमें से कुछ चीजें हैं जो कि बची हुई हैं?
Do you, when you say that he renounced his poetry, do you mean that you feel that he rejected his earlier poetry?
I have read in one of his letters, and I have also read elsewhere, I don't remember where, that he in fact destroyed a lot of his Urdu poetry because he thought it was not up to the standard. First of all,
oh, sorry.
No, so is that even true, or this is something that has just some sort of a rumor?
It's not true that he destroyed poetry, as far as we know. Of course, I will defer to Meher's judgment on this, but he certainly made his published diwan an intikhab rather than a complete collection of every verse he ever wrote. And both Meher and I have written and thought about that extensively. And the time is short here and we can't discuss it. But my short answer is no, he never renounced his early poetry. Over the years, he acquired new skills and new directions in his poetry, but there is one particular letter, but that letter is full of falsehoods. And it's plainly a tendentious letter that's written to a person he was getting money from or hoped to get money from. And it does not, it says a number of untrue things about the composition of his diwan and a lot of other things. So basically, there's a lot of evidence that he did not reject his early poetry, even though he never went back and added it to his published diwan. And as far as I know, there's no real evidence that he did reject it. Meher?
Yeah, I completely agree. He never rejected his poetry as such. He just made a selection of what he considered to be the best or the better verses. And in this process, he published his first diwan. It was actually an intikhab in 1841. And then he never went back to his early verses, the ones that he had left behind. But still, the bulk of his poetry is still from the early period because that was when he was most prolific, you know. So most of his, the bulk of his poetry is from his early period. And after that, for 20 years, he just composed in Farsi. And then he returned to Urdu again when he was appointed at the court of Bahadur Shah Zafar. And also his later poetry is more polished. So most of that is included. But overall, if we want to say that he rejected his early poetry, that's not true. And I want to take this, this opportunity to plug my own book, which just came out. It's called Ghalib, A Wilderness at My Doorstep. And the book is actually an intellectual history of Ghalib. It is a history of his publications and his whole trajectory. So I go into all of these questions that you've been asking.
And I will then plug, there's a little part on my website where I address exactly this question of, did he reject his early poetry? And if anybody wants to email me, I can send them a link to exactly where that is to be found. But Meher and I are in perfect agreement on this. So.
मुझे आपने जिस लेटर का हवाला दिया था प्रोफेसर प्रिचेट, वो गालिब का ही है और उसमें ये बात गलत है, ये सही नहीं है कि वो जो उन्होंने लिखा है कि मैंने अपने बहुत से शेर तल्फ कर दिए।
I don't, as I recall from that letter, he doesn't say that he destroyed the verses. I can't remember what exactly words he uses, but he says he put them aside. Does he say, what does he say, Meher? Do you remember?
No, I don't remember at this time, and it's very
Anyway,
late at night here.
whatever he said, in that same letter, he also says, "Oh, I got rid of all my early verses, and I only put 6 or 8 of them in my divan as a yadgar." And whereas in fact, like 50% or something of the divan is made up of his early verses. So plainly he was telling lies in that letter, and he was telling lies to with an obvious thrust toward the person he was trying to impress and get money out of, because he was desperate for money at many points in his life. So it's not a trustworthy, it's not like we really think of him as tearing up verses. It's like that was a much later thing that he said in very unreliable circumstances.
Okay, Razi bhai, back to you. Hope nobody raised the digital
looks
hand.
like it's getting late, I guess, in India. So
and I'm very jet lagged also.
jet lag ho rahi hai.
Thank
Okay,
you, Meher. Thank you, Meher. It's good to see you.
So
Same
just I would like to have a comment. I mean, if you are really in jet lag situation, you can think to, leave for
Yeah, please.
That's fine, no problem. Also,
I want to say good night.
Yeah, all right.
Thank you, Professor
All right.
Farooq.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
So a general broader question is Ghalib has a broader canvas like Tagore or as a humanist? He comes out as a humanist in comparison to traditional other poets of Urdu literature, certainly like Tagore became quite a big canvas to be more acceptable and known in the Western world. So is this like Ghalib, why he became so popular and famous and pushed people or scholars to really think about him? Is there more depth in all direction and like typical of giants in the Western poetry? Or for example, Tagore.
Okay, well, the case is very different with Tagore because he got Western translation. He translated his own poetry, in fact, and other people translated it also. And he got major literary prizes and therefore became very famous for his translations in the West. Whereas Ghalib, I think most of us would agree, is basically untranslatable for a lot of reasons. And the ghazal with its tight structure and its overdetermination and its wordplay is almost really literally untranslatable. All you have to do is take a share. उसे कौन देख सकता कि ये गाना है वो यकता जो दुई की भू भी होती तो कहीं दो चार होता.
No doubt about it.
The do char hona with a double meaning of 2 and 4 and also to confront somebody, that's uncapturable in English. And without that, I don't think you have the verse translated. I think that you can't say, it doesn't give anything like the pleasure or the experience of the original. And so in that sense, and in many other verses that are like that, Ghalib is untranslatable. And so I've put my eggs in the basket of the internet and in translating him literally and clumsily and pushing you back to the Urdu. So that's my solution to the problem, because fortunately, even though these verses are untranslatable, they're also very small. So with a little bit of exertion, you can get a whole poem, and you don't have to read 50 pages to think about appreciating something. You can read 20 words and you can focus on them and figure them out. And so this is what I'm trying to wheedle and encourage people into doing.
Yeah, thank you so much for really enlightening us. Before you leave, I'll show you next coming Saturday's session of your, he's your friend, I think, old fellow from Colombia. Sarah, can you show the next, poster, please, for the coming Saturday?
Can you all see?
Yeah. Can you, yeah, Professor David Leliver.
Oh, excellent.
So he's one a league from here, you know, the old Allegorian guy. So he's going to talk on formulations of caste and race by and about Muslims in India. It's a very sensitive issue for Muslims elsewhere. So thank you very much, Sarah. This upcoming